So before we get started today, I would just like to have a little bit of housekeeping. I would like to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded. It'll be emailed as well as the deck to each and every one of you after this webinar ends so that you'll have it and you can share it with your colleagues as well. Please type your questions into the question box and we will answer them after the presentation. To get in touch with us, please email team@contentfulmail.com. Our speakers today that are joining us on this webinar are Young Lee, Chief Customer Officer at Victoria Beckham Beauty, Bhavna Srinivas, the Senior Solutions Architect at Netlify, and myself, Amelia Winger-Bearskin, a Developer Evangelist at Contentful. Our agenda for today: e-commerce at scale, Contentful Best Practices Jamstack Solutions, Victoria Beckham Beauty Case Study, Netlify Best Practices Jamstack Solution, and followed by questions and answers. So again, please put in your questions and answers into the box and we'll be answering them after the webinar. All right, let's get started. E-commerce at scale has changed forever. We're in the midst of a market shift that is all digitally focused companies must be aware of when it comes to performing e-commerce at scale. In the past, enterprise typically architected their systems as large monolithic applications running on-premise. But this meant provisioning, configuring, and operating a large number of different types of servers, and it was very difficult to adjust the hardware infrastructure to events like large traffic spikes. So many commerce sites would often go down due to high traffic loads on the biggest online shopping days of the year, like Black Friday. Because these applications were big monoliths, it meant that it was really dangerous to put out new features and updates without the possibility of downtime. And these older architectures just weren't designed to make it easy to integrate with other API-based web services. It's for these reasons that we're seeing companies moving from on-premise systems to cloud-based stacks, like the Jamstack, which stands for JavaScript, APIs, and markup. Microservices architectures running in the cloud means that your infrastructure can scale on demand based upon your traffic. So when you have that huge traffic spike on Black Friday, your site's still up and running with good performance. It also means that you can connect with modern CI and CD systems and safely put out new features and updates to your customers on a continuous basis. So your development teams can work in parallel, independently pushing out new capabilities without interfering with the release from other teams. What are some of the ways in which Contentful and Netlify work on the Jamstack together? Well, we'll hear more from that from Netlify later in this webinar as well. But with Contentful, you can manage your content layer and your serverless functions together, using webhooks and built-in integrations where you can have both editors and developers trigger builds and rebuilds of your static e-commerce website. This way you allow for your editors to do what they do best, deliver quality content at scale to your audience, and have developers using Contentful's API to organize and deliver the content in the stack that they have chosen. So you can also show the build status in the Contentful web app, allowing editors to see build updates in real time. Contentful has a whole suite of integrations you can allow both editors and developers to use, from testing to localization and more. So the question is, how do we get to this promised land of cloud-based modular architecture, which have become the standard for building digital products during this market shift? How do we enable faster launches, quicker to reuse and repurpose the content across landing pages, across multiple sites, or across channels to target new audiences more quickly? And your developers will thank you. They'll be able to ship new pages or features faster using tech stacks they know and love. You have speedier apps. Faster app load times equals better SEO, which equals more visits and more traffic. You have faster page load times, which equals better CX, which is customer experience, which equals a deeper engagement. Higher conversion rates. Targeted content increases its relevance to your different audiences, which increases conversions, revenue, and retention. Contentful and Netlify enable agile and scalable e-commerce in a number of ways. Structured content. You get a lot more flexibility by creating your content as components so that it can be reused and repurposed across products, channels, and teams. It's flexible enough for existing apps and future-proof of those yet to come. It's content agnostic, independent from mediums, platforms, programming languages, etc. It's also not tied to opinionated data models like a traditional CMS. The content is decoupled from the presentation layer. In essence, it's made headless so that your team can build unique customer experiences. By being born in the cloud, it was built from day one to connect with other platforms and services. It's composable, allowing you to use only what you need and adopt new features as you grow. It scales confidently on an enterprise-tested platform. It's ready for agile workflows. It was born agile, purpose-built to integrate with software, delivery pipelines, developer environments, and automation. It changes with your software and workflows. It lets you iterate and experiment fast inside your software delivery pipeline. And now it's time for me to hand it off to Young, the Chief Customer Officer at Victoria Beckham, who's going to walk us through the growth and development of their marketing strategy for their e-commerce website and other content such as blog posts. And Young will speak to how Contentful and Netlify on the Jamstack helped him deliver the results his customers expected. Handing it over to you now, Young.
Thank you, Amelia. I appreciate that. So my name is Young Lee, and I come here with over 20 years of experience in the internet space, specifically as the VP and GM of several e-commerce companies and direct-to-consumer businesses in the multi-channel retail space, as well as the Chief Product Officer of other direct-to-consumer brands. A little bit about Victoria Beckham. She, if you're unfamiliar, she's a celebrity brand with background in the Spice Girls, as well as being married to David Beckham, and she and her family are quite the influencers. They have over 50 million social followers, or she has over 50 million social followers, and is quite the influencer in general. She, about 10 years ago, started a luxury fashion brand and has really become quite the fashion icon as well, with high regards. We created Victoria Beckham Beauty, a brand new brand, out of the opportunity to produce a line of clean and luxury beauty products using only the best ingredients in the world. We just launched this past September as a direct-to-consumer brand with the full intent of owning that and engaging that customer in a very direct way. This is a distinct departure from the fashion side of the business, which is really more driven from a wholesale organization, and hence they're always a bit of an arm's length away from the customer. Next slide. I joined the team at the end of March of 2019, and basically given the mandate to, one, capitalize on the social following and influencer status that Victoria had. That means drive a ton of traffic from every corner of the globe. We are to deliver a beautiful experience, which basically means a ton of very large high-res images and video. Produce it in a luxury way, meaning no downtime ever, and with huge PR launches and activities going on every month. That means we're doing constant content refreshes. And we had 5 months to do it from scratch with a team of about 7 people total. That's in our entire team. Here you see one of the results. This is our homepage of what we ended up producing. Next page. Oh, and at the same time, because Victoria Beckham, the brand, was basically a single entity of the fashion business, we also wanted to launch a brand content site that basically elevated above that fashion brand, that ties together all the commercial enterprises as we launched the beauty brand. This is with the same people and actually launching that 1 month prior to the beauty brand launch. Next page. Here's a great example of how we really tried to integrate great content into a shoppable page at the same time. So in the beauty world, application videos and how-tos are extremely important. And so this is a good example of that. Next page. So we started knowing that we were going to be on the Shopify platform because that's where the fashion business already was, and we were going to extend that. We already had that relationship built. We also knew that we were going to use an integration partner by the name of Foster for our development efforts. Foster's based in the UK, and they specialize in luxury Shopify integrations. Well, we knew that Shopify was going to allow us to deliver 80% of what we needed extremely quickly. And so, that was a natural kind of fit for us. We didn't have a whole lot of time. But after about 2 months of building and trying to actually shoehorn the experience into the Shopify templates, we kind of discovered that this was a bit too much, and we didn't anticipate that we were going to be able to deliver everything that we wanted to seamlessly. We were trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. We had multiple currencies, the seamless experience, complex content templates and management. And while Shopify was great for the e-commerce portion of that, really ultimately for the advanced, nimble, and dynamic content management that we wanted, it just wasn't really built for that. Unfortunately, we only had 3 months to launch. So with Foster, we tried to figure out what were we going to do. Next page. So we decided to try to divorce our e-commerce technology from the rest of the technology and go headless commerce specifically. So still maintaining Shopify as our e-commerce engine, but build basically a static single page application on top of it as the customer interface. So we decided to try to build a proof of concept using Netlify and Contentful on top of Shopify in less than 1 week. And we were able to deliver. Basically, it answered all the core questions that we had. We would be able to quickly iterate to get this thing launched as fast as we possibly could on an infrastructure that scaled extremely well and easily. Using the Netlify global CDN, we could address all of our global needs. We have customers throughout the entire world in every corner, and extremely fast and easy, just basically just a part of what we do, what Netlify does. And then on top of that, Contentful was able to deliver an agile content model that evolved with us, meaning that not knowing what the future was going to hold in terms of our new launches, we didn't know what the structure was going to be. We were able to go in confidently saying, you know what, this will flex with us. Next page. After an admittedly intensive several months worth of weekly sprints, we were able to launch both brand content sites and the beauty site quite flawlessly with no downtime. And the site speeds were ridiculously fast. Next page. We launched, and it was received incredibly well within the beauty community with rave reviews. You'll notice that there's nothing about the technology, which is always a good thing. Technology is not necessarily the focus in the brand launch. Next page. We were able to get products to customers extremely quickly, and the products were very highly rated, and people were completely satisfied with the products. And next page, and they shared it. They shared their experiences with the brand on social media with us, and it was an extremely successful launch. Next page. So this is in our team, just because we have such a small team, we have to kind of congratulate ourselves. So this is our little self high five to ourselves for a successful launch. At this point in time, I'm going to hand it over to Bhavana to go deeper into the architecture.
Hi, everybody. My name is Bhavana Srinivas, and I am a senior solutions engineer at Netlify. So Young walked us through, Victoria Beckham's journey of adopting Jamstack and then successfully building out that e-commerce solution for VB using Contentful and Netlify and Shopify. What we're going to talk about is taking a step back to understand the Jamstack, learn how to build these modern web applications with both Netlify and Contentful. So we'll go through how the two technologies fit into the Jamstack ecosystem, and then how you can use them together to build these modern web apps. Next slide. So let's start with how the Jamstack is different from the traditional way of building websites. So if you look on top, the Jamstack is a web architecture used to build modern web application that basically decouples the front end from the back end. So it stands for JavaScript, API, and markup. And with this, you're now able to build modern, rich, interactive applications that live entirely on the CDN, or the content delivery network, and then make use of APIs and JavaScript to run the dynamic programming that you need. And at the bottom of the slide is the traditional way of building sites. So here, building and hosting are coupled. So when a user requests a page, the file gets processed and served following a series of interaction between a database, the backend code, the server, the browser, and a couple of layers of caching. With the Jamstack, on the other hand, what's happening is the building and the hosting of the site are decoupled. So a user requests a page, the file is already pre-compiled as static assets and gets directly served to the browser from that CDN. And so you may ask, what are the benefits of this approach? Intuitively, you can see how websites built this way are much faster. You pre-build the site into static assets and you host them on the CDN. So the more of your application that you can push to the edge, the better your end user experience, because they're waiting much lesser time now to receive that site or interact with that site. And on the security side, the server-side processes are abstracted into APIs and microservices. So the surface area for attacks are reduced. The traditional architecture is more susceptible to attacks in multiple areas, be it servers or databases. And this goes away with the static way of hosting these web applications. And it's much more scalable. So when you deploy an application on a CDN, you can handle the spikes much more easily, and you don't have to worry about maintaining or scaling the infrastructure. There are CDNs out there that are already built that handle all of this for you. Next slide. So in order to build a site the Jamstack way, there are three key components that you have to think about. So the first one is the content source. Where is the content that hydrates your application comes from? And then the code or the site template, which is versioned in a Git repository, and a place to actually host the application. So the content source traditionally was a CMS. It could be WordPress, Drupal, Sitecore, etc. Some of these are the more popular ones out there. And these CMSs coupled the building and the hosting of the websites together. Whereas now what's happening is enterprises are building web applications, mobile applications, and also various digital interfaces. So the traditional CMSs do not fit this need and have not kept up with this trend of multiple interfaces for the same application. So that's how headless CMSs, or that's why headless CMSs were born, which basically decouples the content from the presentation of that content. So with the Jamstack, you pre-build the site, you separate the building and the hosting of the application. So you still need a hosting provider, but you're pre-building the site into static assets. Next slide. So let's talk about how all of this comes together. Your code lives in Git, and you use a tool to build the site into static assets. This could be a static site generator, and this something like Gatsby, Nuxt.js, Hugo, Jekyll. These are a couple of static site generators out there, and you typically have one for the framework that you choose, be it React or Angular, or it could be Gatsby, for instance. So Contentful, on the other hand, is a leading headless CMS that provides a CDN to host your content and APIs to retrieve that content, irrespective of the application you're building, be it web or mobile or any other digital interfaces. So you have the content on one side, which is the headless CMS on the left. You have your code living in Git, which is built with the static site generator. And then you still need to build this site. And that's where Netlify comes in. So Netlify provides the infrastructure to build and host these static front-end applications. So it lets you go from code to globe very, very quickly by automating the build and the deploy workflows for your team. So if you had to put all of this together, you build the site on Netlify, you pull in the content from Contentful via APIs to create these static pages upfront. Netlify then hosts the site on our application delivery network, making sure it's available for all your users all over the world. Next slide. So here I want to talk about the typical workflows that we see when you're building a web application. So the editorial workflow is what you see on top. The editors create the content structure and they're editing the content on Contentful. And the developer workflow is what you see at the bottom. The developers will build the application and maintain that via Git. And Netlify, we provide build webhooks that can trigger a build on us when either content or code changes. Contentful makes it easy to set up these editorial workflows where you build on Netlify based on specific events, be it a specific editor adding content or the environment that you're adding, be it master, staging, production, etc., or the post that you're actually editing. So you can be very specific on what kind of events trigger a build on Netlify. And the environment variables relating to Contentful can be set up on Netlify's application on a per site basis. So it provides a very secure way to actually storing this information. So now every successful build on Netlify will result in a deploy of your site on our ADN, the application delivery network, which is what we've represented with the globe on the right. So every build will trigger a deploy on the ADN. Now, this application delivery network is purpose-built for hosting static front-end application and is built over leading cloud providers like AWS, Google, Azure, etc. So we instantly invalidate the cache on our edge nodes on every successful deploy. So this makes sure that your end users are always seeing the latest content on the site. So this way, large teams are able to very effectively build on both Contentful and Netlify using these two workflows, the editorial workflow and the developer workflow. Netlify makes it very simple to build and host front-end applications while providing a great developer experience and tremendous boost in developer productivity to build these static sites really quickly. Next slide. So here what we're trying to show is the kind of companies that we work with and the plans that we have for both developers, startup plans, as well as for companies and businesses. So Netlify and Contentful serve authors and developers working on individual projects up to web projects at large organizations. And between the two of us, we have more than 1 million developers and editors and businesses that use our service to build these web projects. Some common use cases are marketing sites and corporate sites, landing and campaign pages, and e-commerce sites like Victoria Beckham Beauty and more. So on the right, you can see some of the brands using both Contentful and Netlify together. Fast-growing startups like Peloton and Flexport use these two technologies to build out their multi-language sites. And WeWork has more than 50 developers rapidly building landing pages and sites on Netlify while relying on the Contentful APIs to provide the right content. So our plans are very easy to get started. You can sign up on our websites today. You can use the starters. And for much larger organizations, we also have SLAs, large teams, and high performance options that can be very customized for you. Thank you for joining us today, and we're really excited to see the applications you build on both Netlify and Contentful. And at this point, we have a quick poll for you before we go into the Q&A. And the poll question is, speaking of getting started with Netlify and Contentful, we're going to see who wants to learn more about using the Jamstack architecture within your organization. So we'll give you a couple of seconds to fill that out and before moving on to the Q&A.
All right, we're going to give a couple more seconds to wrap up the poll, so please go ahead and vote if you haven't had a chance. All right, thank you so much for voting and sharing that information with us. And last, we're going to move on to our questions and answer section. I see we have a lot of questions that were posted. I'm going to go ahead and read off some of them, and then our panelists and myself can answer them. We had a question here about Shopify and Contentful from an anonymous attendee. Were product details and configurations managed in Contentful or Shopify? Contentful has an integration with Shopify that allows users to search and select Shopify products using valid API storefront tokens. So I hope that answers your question, but Young, do you have any other color on that for the ways in which your team were able to successfully connect the two?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I appreciate that question from the anonymous attendee. Essentially, when we were going through this, the more rich content data, the data and the content product data that we had, we wanted to make sure that they synced between Shopify and Contentful, but we wanted to make sure that the details, like for instance, the pricing data stayed where they should actually reside, which is, in this particular case, pricing belonged to Shopify because that's where the storefront was. And so we wanted single source of truth. And so where necessary, we actually do synchronize data between the Shopify storefront and the Contentful content management system. And it's pushed back and forth, but there is a kind of a distinctive and singular source of truth for each piece of content.
Great, thank you for that. Wow, we have so many great questions. I'm just scrolling through all of them. One by Killian is, how do you actually keep the CMS layout in sync with the often drastically changing static front end? I know from the Contentful side, it's really important to make sure that your content editors as well as your developers are in sync with creating your content model so that you can decide which content types or for example, an image or microcopy or larger copy triggers a build so that you can do that with webhooks and Netlify. And maybe Bhavna, do you have any other suggestions with that?
Yeah, I mean, those webhooks are really key while, syncing your content and making sure that the application is always serving up the latest content. So when you do set up those build hooks, any events on Contentful or even changing your code and your content will trigger that build on Netlify to make sure that end users are always seeing a latest version of your site. That's really key. Yeah.
I'll give you 2 more sentences on this for us in terms of real life experience. This is something that has to be conscientiously thought through so that we're making sure that as we actually evolve our content model, it still is somewhat retroactive and supports kind of the older models, so to speak, until we actually phase it out. And so it's not, I don't think that you get to kind of change things for free, so to speak. You have to do things conscientiously, and to a certain extent, I think it's more around the lines of, content model as source code almost, so to speak, so that you can still say that these are in sync with each other.
Absolutely, absolutely. And speaking of we have another question from an anonymous attendee. Are there any SEO related concerns when publishing the same content on multiple sites, and in parentheses, duplicate content issues? So I'm not sure if.
I think I can answer that one. I think there were a couple of SEO related questions, and so maybe I can touch upon that one as well as site speed. I think just to, again here, kind of balancing the site content and the heaviness of the imagery in the videos. That was the other question that kind of came up, I think I saw. But specifically around SEO related concerns on duplicate content on multiple sites. There's only one site that actually points to our live site. And so the way that it works with Netlify, we can have multiple dev environments or staging environments. And all of those are actually, for us, are actually password protected. And so it's not accessible to the public unless you have just the basic auth. And so as a result, really, the live site itself is not really live. There's only one live site, I'm sorry. And then any updates to the site is just a quick switch once we've actually tested. So it's not really an issue from an SEO standpoint. The other one that actually came up was, site speed, and are we afraid about impacting SEO because, while the templates themselves are loaded extremely fast because it's a static site, we actually have another layer of problem that the content itself, like videos, still are very large. And so it's something that we constantly grapple with, but with the help of Contentful actually helps to deliver has the ability to basically crop in on large images and delivers optimized web images for us on the fly. So that's really, really extremely helpful for us.
Excellent, thank you. And we have another from Heath Hamilton. Regarding use cases, have you seen this done for something like product documentation portal? I know for Contentful, we've done a couple of case studies and webinars, including some blog posts around knowledge-based solutions using Contentful. So I'll definitely connect those links in our follow-up email as well. Do any of the other panelists have recommendations on similar, or perhaps Young, do you have something like product documentation that lives in the same site?
We haven't incorporated documentation into Contentful, not yet.
We see this pretty commonly on our side as well when we're talking to customers. One aspect of e-commerce is the checkout, and the other is also how do you constantly maintain that product information. And so we've actually seen it in combination with Contentful, where they pull the content from there and maintain those product details as well, be it specific prices for certain customers, to provide that kind of custom content, which is more dynamically generated, or just maintaining that whole list of the catalog. So that comes up pretty often on our side when we have these e-commerce discussions as well.
Wonderful. And we have another question from Rodrigo Barona. Do you have a preview to view the website? And you have to manage the stock and present on a site static website. So maybe we can talk a little bit. I know for myself, I've seen how important it is for editors to be able to have previews. So can we speak a little bit to that on the Jamstack?
Yeah, for sure. So on Netlify side, what we're providing is a deploy preview. So every time you make any changes to your content or your code, your editors or your developers are making those changes, we are able to generate a version of your site that is not necessarily live, but it's still a live URL that you can now pass around and make a comment or make any changes to. So you're not necessarily publishing that out live to your production site, but we do create a deploy preview of what your site would look like if these changes went alive. And so this is one of the more popular features because, like you said, you do want to be able to see the changes that you're making. And so we've solved this problem by providing deploy previews for any content or code changes that you do make on any of your branches.
I have another question from Loke Carlson. What were the top pros and cons that led to the decision of going with Gridsome compared to Gatsby or any other framework?
Oh, this gets to a level that I think is probably a little bit deeper than I am prepared for. I think this is just more on the developer side there. They felt most comfortable with it. So I don't know what the core decisions were on that.
Absolutely. And I think that connects later with a question that Matthew Smith had as well, which is, did you have a special considerations with mobile, and how do your content creators handle building content for different resolutions? And I think it really connects with what Young said, which is in the headless space, you are decoupling the presentation layer from the content layer. So for the content creators, they are concentrated on getting that message out to your customers where they are and when they are. And the developers are the ones that decide how that content is delivered with the stack of their choice. So I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit, Young, or anyone else, about if there were any other types of specific considerations around mobile, but really headless does give the freedom so that content creators are editing the content and the developers can make those decisions of when that content is delivered. And if it changes based on mobile, if it changes based on a jumbo screen or an in-screen in-person experience at a store, the content can remain the same, and it's really the development cycle that determines how it's delivered.
It's a great question, and it's something that we do struggle from the editor's side to say, okay, if we know that there's as an example for a blog post or something that that we want a single image, oftentimes based off of landscape versus a portrait space, we want the focus to be on a different portion of that, and so, what we've done in terms of a couple different solutions is that we sometimes will have a mobile specific image, but other times we've actually started to incorporate some of the great functionality that both the Contentful and Netlify platforms provide for us. So in this particular instance, we're playing around with something that Contentful has, a piece of function that is called focal point, which allows us within the CMS, the editors to actually select where the focus of that image is. And so the viewport can actually still be maintained within that particular center point. We've been playing around with it, and so far some nice successes out of it, but it is a learning process for us to make sure that we kind of balance the need for specific imagery versus not having to overload ourselves with loading multiple versions.
Great. We have another question from Diego Vogel. Say you have multiple environments, dev, stage, prod. When content is updated in Contentful, is there a way to specify which environment the changes get pushed to on the Contentful side, or does that need to be done on the Netlify side? I'll answer for the Contentful side. You can set up your webhook so that at whatever stage and whatever permissions your editors have, it can trigger a webhook that creates a rebuild on Netlify. So you could set it up at the environment level, the content type level, the space level. It's really up to your admins on your space. And I'll let Netlify sort of talk about how they do that as well.
Yeah, and this kind of flows very well into the Netlify world as well. Based on the environment that you're working in and you trigger a build, those will be separate applications on Netlify as well. So if you have a master branch, that is considered your production instance of your site. And if you have a staging branch or a staging environment, that becomes a staging version of your site. So different branches or different environments or contexts will translate to different applications on Netlify so that they're very isolated from each other and can be updated and worked on independent of each other.
Great. We have another question from Killian Stallinger. Do you recommend using Netlify for single page applications? And that'll be a question for Bhavna.
Yeah, definitely. So, single page applications, PWAs, any front-end applications, these are great use cases for Netlify, as long as it is a static front-end application where you're building HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, then they are good candidates for Netlify.
I have a couple of questions that are talking about preview, and I know we touched on it a little bit. Bhavna, do you want to go any deeper on how the preview works in Netlify and how some best practices are to set it up?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So you mean the deploy previews, Amelia?
Yeah.
Preview of the content? Yeah. So on the webinar, we discussed how there are two main workflows while building a web application, right? The content workflow, where the editors and non-technical folks are making changes to the content. And then there's the developer workflow. Now, when either of these changes, we want the site to be updated, but maybe not necessarily go live. And so there's an in-between, a preview of your site that you want to be able to see. And so based on whether it's content changing or based on whether it is a pull request that you make on Git, Netlify generates a deploy preview for you. Or this could be extended even to a branch preview. So irrespective of the context you are in, any change that is made to your site can trigger a deploy preview. And it is by default, when you sign up for Netlify and walk through the flow, you'll notice that deploy previews are automatically created for your site. So you can be very sure that you want these content changes or you are happy with these edits before publishing that to your master branch or as the live version of your site. I'm happy to follow up with some documentation on how to get started with that, but it's pretty straightforward in terms of setting it up on Netlify.
Great, thank you. And I had a question around, Max Mizinski had a question around translations. Young, how did you handle translations on the Victoria Beckham Beauty site?
It's a great question. We haven't actually done translations yet because it's more a function of our limitation on our editor side versus the value that we're going to see of it. But we're definitely looking in the long term for how to incorporate translations. And there, we're going to lean quite heavily on Contentful's capabilities around that. Amelia, do you want to kind of speak a little bit how it's set up within Contentful?
Sure. So if you're working with content that needs to be available in multiple languages, locales let you define localization of content and select specific locales when querying on our content delivery API. So we also have a lot of integrations with other types of localization software. But you can set it up within your content management API so that you can select different responses in different languages based on the locale of the viewer. It may be the case that you want the default locale to be required, but the other locales will be option. For example, if you want to ensure that the English locale fields are always filled out, but it's okay to publish the entry with the Chinese field empty, and then in that case, you can remember to select or allow empty fields for that locale. So it can get pretty specific based on the type of information you have throughout your website. And enabling locales after just adding a couple of settings. Once you enable it, locales are enabled on a per space and per field basis. You can also toggle between the visibility of the locale fields within your entries to make your editorial experience easier so that the editors can see that as well. You can also set tasks so that without something being translated, you could kind of stop the build from happening in order for it to be passed to another team member so they can review the localization before then approving it, and then it can be pushed live. So you can have kind of multiple stages of checks and balances within that for your team as well on the Contentful layer. Just checking through all of our questions. We have so many wonderful questions. And I do apologize ahead of time if we don't get to your question. We've gotten some really, really great ones, and I'm kind of trying to condense a couple of them together so that we meet our time. Let's see. Actually, I have just a really broad one right up here from Philip Moore, which will we see any more technical implementation details? Do either of you have anything you'd like to add on your technical implementation for the Victoria Beckham Beauty site?
There's probably a lot of detail. One detail that I was looking at some of the questions. One, there are questions around identity and how we synchronize with what's happening within Shopify. What I'll point to here is one of the features that we use in the Netlify environment are functions. So that basically on the static site, we actually rely quite heavily on functions that we built to basically create dynamic portions of the site. And that includes login, it includes, the ability to, as a for instance, pull in our order history based off of who that person might be across multiple Shopify storefronts, in the back end that are in different currencies. It just allows us that huge amount of flexibility to still maintain dynamicism within the templates in a static page.
Yeah, and to add on to that, be it e-commerce or any other application that we're talking about, which involves login and making calls to third-party services, like for instance, for updating the prices or for helping with checkout or shipping, for instance, Those are add-ons that you can tag along with any site that you're building with Netlify. So like he said, functions is a great place to do exactly that, where we're spinning up these serverless functions for you to run, to make calls to APIs or even run your microservices there. And then the other aspect is identity, which involves login. So I just answered a question that another attendee posted, which was, how do we handle login between, say, Shopify, like user accounts, and then connect those with accounts on Shopify? And so that's something that Netlify offers, where authentication is handled through identity. So users log in to their account, they're able to see things specific to them. And then we can use permissions that they have now in Shopify as well, extend that to authorization on Shopify as well. So these are add-ons that Netlify provides to add more interactivity and that dynamic feel to your application. So to answer Philip's question, we can like if you have any questions, then feel free to contact Netlify about any of these, so we can go more into your use case and understand what exactly you will need from the solution.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for everyone for attending and joining. Once again, you will be emailed the deck as well as the video from this. And if we had mentioned any resources, we'll be including those in the email as well. Thank you so much to our panelists for your time and for sharing your information with our really big record-breaking audience today. So thank you everyone for tuning in. And thank you once again. I hope everyone has a wonderful day.